Hi everybody, and welcome you all to a continuing series in Toronto. This is a great moment for us because it represents a continuation of that which was started in the last few years, but these public lectures are becoming more and more familiar and more relevant and more powerful and more necessary. Israel at 70, Judaism and Democracy, the Toronto iEngage lecture series, is thrilled that our opening lecture is with Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, the president of Hartman Institute. And I'm personally honored and thrilled that you're here again. It's great. I had the fabulous privilege of listening to you 3 times today so far. I heard you with the rabbis group today. I heard you at a talk with the board and the small group, and then I heard you one-on-one say, really? They really want to hear about it? Yeah, we really want to hear about it. We really particularly want to hear you, and we're honored that it's taking place at Beth Torah, which is my home synagogue. I'm further thrilled that Living Jewishly, an organization that has been founded by myself as visionary, along with a grant from the Wagner family, has sponsored tonight's lecture and the ongoing lectures in Toronto, and I think you'll be hearing more from us. It's in many ways a response to the call of Rabbi Hartman to create visionary programming and demand of Hartman, some programming that responds to our needs. And you're right, Toronto is a vibrant place, and it does have the depth and breadth and meaningfulness that you're looking for to plant the seed of Hartman, and we are thrilled to be able to take so many years of hard work and continue building it here in Toronto. I'm further delighted that Rabbi Eric Gervis, where's Eric? Rabbi Eric Gervis has taken a role at Hartman Institute. He was my classmate when I was studying there in the rabbinic leadership. And Eric, you were much smarter than I am because you got out of the pulpit much quicker. So I now have a model to follow, so I'm keeping an eye on you. Barbara Birch is here. Barbara, what's your official title? Vice President of Development, and we're delighted to meet you as well. And we have with us this evening a guest, J.R. Rothstein, who's a Fulbright scholar at U of T, who's doing a number of things at the law school, but he has a particular interest and expertise in Jewish-Muslim historical relations, and had a pleasure getting to know him a bit, and we're happy that he's here. And of course, members of the board and ardent supporters of Hartman, we're glad that you're here. So on behalf of our congregation, Living Jewishly, the Wagner family, and many of you, you are in for a great treat. I can tell you Donniel is at his finest today. Really, I'm not making it out to be anything greater than it is. It's been great so far. So everybody, this is Rabbi Donniel Hartman, and we're delighted to have him here.
So good. I have notes. I'm really nervous now. Oh, I had a piece of paper.
Oh, you want your notes? That one?
Yep, God bless. Hi, good evening, everyone. Being 70 years old, no, I'm not 70. 59. Sure. Being 70 is a unique time for Israel, because it's a time for us to be able to, on the one hand, celebrate what Israel is, and think about the Israel that we want. 70 is, all anniversaries have this ambivalence to them. It's a moment for us to shep nachas, to feel proud, because the founders of the state weren't sure that we were going to make it to 70. There's something great has been achieved. But part of this 70-year celebration is not just merely a moment to look at all of Israel's successes. That's not where Israel or the Jewish people, or in fact the world, is right now. A lot of us are looking at the gaps. A lot of us are asking, what has Israel achieved, but what has it not yet achieved? Maybe it's part of, we Jews are never fully happy. But there's something destructive about it, but there's also something very positive about it. Because when you're never fully happy, you're never fully satisfied, you constantly push. And so tonight I want to push. I want to talk about what's the next step. Where do we want Israel to be at 75 or at 80 or at 85? And in doing so, I want to go back to the dream of what Israel was supposed to be. How did the early Zionists envision what constituted a Jewish democracy? What did they think we were supposed to create? Look at where did it go wrong or right, and where do we have to move as we look forward over the next decade or so. See, the idea of a Jewish democracy is one that the Jewish world could very easily unite around. But as we know, the theme that I was given tonight is precisely that which is creating deep divisions between Jews and the State of Israel. Over the last year, more than the issues of occupation and power, most people are beginning to recognize that it's possible that issues of Palestinians and occupation might not be in Israel's hands alone. It might require more than Israel to resolve this issue by itself. And there is a tolerance or a semi-tolerance on this. But on the issue of a democracy, on what constitutes this democracy, on a sense that Israel is not fulfilling its democratic aspirations in a way that enables world Jewry to feel a part of the Israel discourse, this is increasingly becoming a deeply divisive issue. Now, it wasn't supposed to be divisive. The founders of the country had a very simple idea. This is what a Jewish democracy is, according to the framers of Israel's Declaration of Independence. It states as follows: the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Not bad. Who's for? You could all vote. This paragraph would not be approved in the Knesset in 2018. There isn't a majority of Israelis or a majority of Israeli legislators who would accept the Declaration of Independence as binding on the State of Israel. Now, this paragraph, which is the key ideological paragraph of the Declaration, is divided into two. The second part, which speaks about it will ensure complete equality of social, political rights to all of its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, sex, guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, etc., safeguard holy places of all religions, faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. This second part of this paragraph was required by the United Nations in order to grant Israel legitimacy and standing in the United Nations. The condition of the partition plan was to create in Israel both a state for the Jewish people and a state for the Arabs in Palestine. on condition that they all created democratic institutions and were willing to build those their institutions in accordance with the charter, with the Human Rights Charter of the United Nations. So we took the United Nations Charter and put it into our Declaration of Independence. That's the democratic part. And the democratic part is relatively simple and clear and universally acceptable by anybody who lives in a Western liberal democracy. The first part of this paragraph is the notion of the Jewishness in a Jewish democracy. And I'm going to reread it to you. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country to the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. There are two features which express the Jewishness of Israel according to the framers of the Declaration. The first is that there will be an ingathering of exiles. And the second is that the ideas of justice, freedom, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets, will define the value system of the state of Israel. This is what a Jewish state means according to the framers of the Declaration. What then does it really mean? First, the Jewishness of Israel is first and primary and almost exclusively not a Jewish state in the sense of a state of Judaism. It's a Jewish state in the sense of being the state of the Jews. What makes a Jewish democracy? A Jewish democracy is a state where the Jews are the nation state which will be governed by democratic principles. A Jewish state is parallel to an Irish state, a Greek state, a French state. Jewish is that it's the state of the Jews. For the secular Ashkenazi framers of the state, that's the only Jewishness they were interested in from. They wanted to free Jews both from the political realities of diasporic life, which made the existence of Jews precarious, but they also wanted to free the Jews from the Jewishness of the diaspora, which in their minds was perverse, sick, and unhealthy. It was created by a people who were disconnected from nature, disconnected from their land. What is a Jewish state? A Jewish state is a liberal democracy of the Jews. Now, the Jews had a problem. Unlike the French and unlike the Greeks, we weren't living in France and Greece. So therefore, in order to create the nation state of the Jews, the first thing you need to do is to bring the Jews. Now, we were the first nation without a state. We weren't a religion. We were a people who were outsiders in the nations that we lived in. That's why, by the way, Balfour recognized the idea of a homeland of the Jewish people. The idea of a homeland of the Jewish people is basically an anti-Semitic doctrine. Because imagine for a moment, and just let's pretend as if this is possible. Imagine for a moment that an African American comes to President Trump and says, it's been a couple of hundred years now, and frankly, I'm tired of waiting to be equal here in the United States, to be in the United States. I've tried. I know we've gotten rid of slavery and we've gotten rid of discrimination. And the Constitution is perfect, but for some reason, the inalienable rights of all people doesn't seem to apply fully to me. The fact that I need an organization called Black Lives Matter tells you something's not working here. I want to go back to Africa. Please support the inalienable rights of the African Americans to sovereignty in Liberia. The President of the United States would say, what are you talking about? You're Americans. What do you mean Liberia? You're Americans. After emancipation, that's what the European response to the Zionist movement should have been. The response should have been, well, you don't need a homeland of the Jewish people anymore. You're now citizens here. Judaism is a religion. Your new national identity is whatever particular European nation state you happen to live in. But precisely because we were in this unnatural reality, in which we were a nation without a land, the first prerequisite of creating a Jewish state is to create the opportunity of immigration of Jews to the land of Israel. To leave the nation states, which even though they should have accepted us, did not. And consequently, even Balfour and even the League of Nations call for aliyah, call for facilitating the immigration of this nation into their nation state. That's all that secular Zionists really wanted. Now, they were open to a little bit of Judaism. But what does a little bit of Judaism, according to the Declaration of Independence, mean? There's this beautiful line about the prophets of Israel. But the sentence is, it will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. Notice the order. It doesn't say it will be based on the visions of the prophets of peace, justice, and freedom. It will be based on the ideas of peace, freedom, and justice as envisioned. The prophets aren't the source for freedom, peace, and justice. Freedom, peace, and justice are universal values which the framers of the state want to define the nature of our community. The place of Judaism is not to determine the values of the state, but to create a cultural particular language within which the universal values can express themselves. Judaism is not meant to determine the values of the state of Israel, according to the framers. Universal ethics are. The Charter of the United Nations is supposed to do so. The relationship between universalism and particularism, according to the framers of the Declaration, is that we want to be a Western democracy which accepts universal values. Particularism is not the place that your values are framed. Particularism is a language for universal values. Freedom, justice, equality, those are our commitments. Why are we committed to them? Not because that's what it says in the prophets, because frankly, if you open up the prophets, there's only about 10 chapters which care about that. Most of the time, the prophets are fetching about idolatry. They're talking about the end of days in which all the nations of the world will bow down to the Jews. They're talking about the wars and the punishment of the Jews for their sins and their ultimate victory. Prophets aren't sweet people. They're not nice people. That's why they were ignored by everybody. They were angry people full of venom. Many of them were also zealots. You're not building the state of Israel on the prophets. You're building it on universal values of peace, freedom, and justice. Now, those 10 chapters of the prophets which represent that or reflect it, those are the prophetic chapters which become the foundation of the state of Israel. The order is critical. This is what the framers, the secular Ashkenazim, imagined. There'll be a little culture. The culture of Israel is the particular language of universalism as it gets translated and filtered through a Jewish tradition, and only that Jewish tradition which allows for it is the Judaism that we want. That's also the reason why they picked the prophets. Actually, if you wanted to speak about justice, there's far more justice in the Bible than there is in the prophets. The Bible speaks about economic justice, social justice, care for others. The problem with the Bible is law. And under Jewish law, a prophet who legislates is a false prophet. The framers of secular Zionism wanted Jewish culture, which represents universal values. It did not want to give any space for Jewish law to determine the nature of a Jewish democracy. And that's why they picked the prophets as distinct from the Torah, the prophecy of Moses, the Talmud, Jewish law, or Jewish tradition. They picked the only individuals who have no ability to declare anything which is legally binding. And if you think this was by accident, the secular Zionists who founded the country were secular. They were apikorsim. They were not amaratzim. They were heretics. They were not ignorant. And they were very, very careful. Very, very precise. So what is a Jewish democracy? Here we're now 70 years later. What was their vision? Their vision was Canada for Jews. That was what they envisioned. Now, it would also, it would be sensitive to minorities. It wouldn't be as it wouldn't have as multi-ethnic and multinational identities as Canada has. But for those who are of a different national identity, after we foster Jewish immigration, it will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It's a Jewish state which will treat every national minority in that state equally. It's a country for the Jews to move to, but it's not a country which only cares about the Jews. Where Israel will give preference to Jews is in immigration. It will not give preference in your inalienable rights once you are a citizen of the country. All citizens will be treated equally. And consequently, under international law, the right of return or a preferential treatment of immigrants does not violate human rights, because you have a moral responsibility to treat all citizens equally. You do not have a moral responsibility to grant citizenship to somebody who is not a citizen of your country. Nobody has an inalienable right to be a citizen of your country, and consequently you do not violate the Charter of Human Rights by not applying it consistently. But once you become a citizen, that's why immediately afterwards, this is going to be the nation state of the Jews. Jews have a unique right to move here, otherwise we're not going to be able to create the nation state. But do not mistakenly believe that because this is the state of the Jews, any discrimination between Jew and non-Jew will be allowed in the country. The challenge of this declaration is that it was powerfully meaningful for the secular Ashkenazi elite who founded the country. It was, however, a definition of Jewishness that did not work for the Jews. Jews who moved to Israel were not as secular Zionist as the elite founders of the country. Now, elites very often make a mistake, especially elites who are enlightened. When you're enlightened, you believe that everybody else is eventually going to be what? Enlightened. See, if I'm enlightened, do you want to be enlightened? Like, who doesn't want to be enlightened? Whoever here doesn't want to be enlightened, please raise your hand. Like, who doesn't want enlightenment? And if I have enlightenment, of course you're going to want to be enlightened. Like, who wouldn't want to be enlightened? And your assumption is that your enlightenment is contagious. And that it's only a matter of time that everybody's going to be enlightened. So there's a few Orthodox in Israel. Not that many. Eventually, they're going to be what? Enlightened. So it'll be a generation. They're gone. Because who wouldn't want to be an enlightened secular Jew? If I'm freeing you from the prisons of diasporic spiritual poverty, who doesn't want to, who wouldn't want? You just don't know it yet, but one generation. Sfaradim. The Sfaradim in Israel were the only group that weren't allowed to choose what schools they went to. With the exception of the Teimanim, everyone else just about was forced to go to secular schools. Because our job was to make you a good Ashkenazi Austrian of Moroccan descent. But I was saving you. I was enabling you to become part of the new enlightened vision. This story, however, was deeply meaningful to them, and it created an interesting vision of Israel. But it contradicted a core aspiration of most Zionists. Most Zionists saw the state of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. Now, a homeland has a particular quality to it. A homeland of a nation state is a place where I get to do Jewish publicly, not where just Jews get to live. Now, it's true. When I'm in the midst of a pogrom, my ultimate fantasy is to be a place that I'm going to be safe. But part of the Europe that I want to leave is a Europe that said to me, you're allowed to be a Jew in your home and a human being in public. I want to be a Jew in my home. But when I move to a homeland, being a Jew in my home means not just being a Jew in my private home, it also means being a Jew where? In the public space. But the Declaration of Independence said, you don't need that. And if you're going to be Jewish, I have a new Judaism. And that new Judaism is basically a socioeconomic ideology. Socialism is Judaism. Speaking Hebrew in a socialistic environment is the new, connected to the land, is the Jewish identity of the future. Anything else is unnecessary. I don't need anything more than a few chapters of the prophets to sprinkle from time to time as I talk about justice, justice shall you pursue. I'll quote a prophet. Peace. It's not even a chapter, it's 10 verses. I want 10 verses of Judaism, and the bottom line is that those 10 verses of Judaism were not thick enough for the Jews. The Jews wanted a public sphere that didn't just have 10 verses of Judaism in order to govern their Jewish life. And they didn't buy the secular dream. Now, the secular Zionists had to compromise from the beginning. And they were willing to do so because they knew that it was just a compromise for a generation. That any compromise that we're going to make is going to be short-lived because the others are all going to become like me. So if I do something, it's just a short-term patch. And so instead of creating a sophisticated constitutional system or a sophisticated intellectual system to make sense of what does it mean for Jews to live Jewishly in their home, they left it as a void, hoping to get to this place. And in the meantime, they compromised. So the first compromise is in the Declaration of Independence itself. In order to get the Orthodox, in particular Agudat Yisrael and the religious Zionist communities to sign, they said God has to be here. You know, if in America, in the United States, you trust in God on your... shouldn't there be some God? Because for us, coming back to Israel is the Holy Land, etc., there should be some God here. And they said, what do you mean God? There is no God in my world. Well, there's God in my world. Okay, we'll call him the Rock of Israel. So the Declaration of Independence declares at the end that this rebirth of Israel is, we give thanks to the Rock of Israel. Now, the Rock of Israel is Tzor Yisrael, is one of the names for God. So when an Orthodox Jew sees Tzor Yisrael, they see what? God. When a secular Jew sees the word Tzor Yisrael, they see what? A rock. It's a perfect compromise. Here it is. We're having a dialogue. It's a perfect compromise. I'll give you your tzor, I get a rock, you get God, life's good. It was similar, by the way, to most Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations. When we negotiated in Camp David with Jimmy Carter, Israel, I don't know if you know, we signed a document, and the minute the document was signed, together with the document is a whole range of letters that are submitted by Arafat and by Sadat, excuse me, and by Begin, in which they explain that what they signed they don't accept. This is no joke. Israel, for example, declares that it accepts the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, and in an accompanying letter, Menachem Begin says, but I don't believe that the Palestinians have inalienable rights to a state. So what I said, it's just words, but that's not what I meant. And this way we could all sign a unified treaty which none of us fully accept. And then from there, that's supposed to be the foundations of a relationship. So similarly here, you have your God, and I don't think, so you think God is now part of the story. For me, God's not, why should God be part of the story? I don't want a God. I want Austria of Jews. I don't want God. So, but we start by compromising. Two, one of the more interesting and more significant and probably the most significant compromise that secular Zionism accepted. And if you want to understand issues of Jewish state and democracy in Israel, this is the key. We accepted the Ottoman millet system on personal status. What did the Ottoman system declare? The Ottoman millet system which means communities, is that each indigenous community, each monotheistic indigenous community in the Ottoman Empire was allowed autonomy over its own religious life. It could appoint its own rabbis who could then judge the community on issues of personal status. So, who is a Muslim, a Christian, who's a Shia, who's a Christian, who's a Jew? The Ottoman Empire says, I'm not going to decide for you. You Jews decide for your own, right, for yourself. How do you get married? How do you that's your Ottoman Empire. We will govern you. In particular, if you fall under the category of Ahl al-Kitab, if you are a people of the book, you have freedom of religious practice, and you will have your own courts to govern yourself. Now that makes sense in the Ottoman Empire. In a Jewish state, we should also have accepted the millet system. For whom? For Christians and Muslims. For Christians and Muslims as national minorities within the state of Israel, they should have complete freedom of religion. And the millet system would, to recognize them as indigenous communities capable of governing their own personal status religious issues, was perfectly sensible. Here comes, however, the great, great mistake. The state of Israel declared that there's a millet for Jews. That instead of the state governing the Jews, it recognized Judaism as a sub-community in its own state. Let me say this again, because it's actually incoherent. Here it is, the nation state of the Jews recognizes the Jews as being governed by a subsection of authority separate from the national government institutions of the state of Israel itself. And that's how the rabbinate gets formed. It gets formed because once you accept the millet system, or as a compromise, the rabbinate Orthodox Jews said, who's going to govern the personal status of the Jews? I see the Muslims are going to govern their status. Christians are going to govern their status. There are 15 different sub-communities, millets in Israel. For each subsection of Islam, Christianity, Druze, each one has their own millet with their own authority. And then along came Orthodox Judaism and said, so who's going to decide for the Jews? And the answer should be, you know who's going to decide? It's the state of Israel. This is the nation. Jews aren't a minority that needs to be protected. This is the homeland of the Jewish people, and it is a Jewish state in the sense that it is governed by democratic principles. I don't need to protect your rights. Just do whatever you want to do. Just like Jews in Canada or Jews in the United States, you don't need somebody to protect you from the nation state. But the Orthodox said, you know what? But for me to sit in the coalition, let me be the one in charge of the Jewish stuff. Now, according to the Declaration, there wasn't supposed to be Jewish stuff. Jewish stuff was what you did where? In your home. National Jewish stuff. Now, the great tragedy of secular Zionism is that it did not create either multiple millets within the Jewish community or competition for who should govern that millet. The only individuals who said, I care about personal status of the Jews was, the Orthodox said, I have a Torah. Secular Zionism, what's your Torah? I don't have one. My Torah is 10 verses of the prophets which echo in Hebrew the universal values of freedom, justice, and peace. That's my Torah. If I have a Torah, it's a socioeconomic Torah. If I have a Torah, it's culture, it's Hebrew language, it's living in the land. It's social justice and economic equality. That's my Torah. I don't have a Torah on how to get married. I don't have a Torah of personal Jewish status. I'm what? I'm non-religious. And as secular, instead of secular being an alternative version of religion, it is a vision of non-religion. And therefore, it never competes with orthodoxy. Now, they saw that compromise. And they said, you know what? It's okay. In a few years, it'll pass. But at that moment, the nation state of the Jewish people stops functioning as a coherent nation state when it comes to serving the Jewish people. In this state, for example, under the millet system, there are people who don't fall under the category of Christian, don't fall under the category of Muslim, fall under the category of Jews, but the rabbinate doesn't accept them or refuses to marry them. Now imagine, not only is Israel the only democracy in the world which doesn't have civil marriages, the only one in the world, because the nation state is not, it's like that. What does it mean to be part of it? You can get married civil. None. It's the only nation, it's the only democracy in the world that doesn't have civil marriage. More than that, there are citizens of the state of Israel who can't get married. Now, I'll say there are citizens of the state who can't get married. And that the only solution for them getting married, imagine a sovereign state saying to somebody, you want to get married? Go to Cyprus. This is not exactly a coherent statement for a sovereign state. The meaning of sovereignty is you take responsibility for your stuff. Your responsibility is you're supposed to govern your life. It took close to 15 years after the Russian Aliyah to come up with part of a solution. there is a whole group of people whom the rabbinate will not marry. Now, if you are a conservative or reform convert, or you are a convert by an Orthodox rabbi, a conservative reform convert in Israel, or actually even outside of Israel, or a convert by an Orthodox rabbi who's not part of a list which no one will tell you who's on it. We're going to tell you, but it's complicated. But there is a list which doesn't exist. Anyone who falls under those categories, who lives in the state of Israel, cannot get married. You're a citizen of the state, because under the law of return, you are accepted as a citizen if you are converted by a legitimate denomination anywhere in the world. Actually, the converts who have greatest difficulty getting citizenship in Israel are Orthodox converts in North America. Because Israel, having a rabbinate, does not believe or is not competing to offer a different conservative reform conversion. Therefore, if you convert under conservative reform in North America, your conversion qualifies as citizenship. But if you're Orthodox, Israel says we're the only ones who determine orthodoxy. Consequently, Orthodox conversions outside of Israel are not accepted unless you're on the list, which I can't tell you about. But if you are, you're now a citizen of the state of Israel. You can't get married in the state of Israel. You have to go to Cyprus. There's no alternative. For the Russians, who aren't conservative reform, but rather for the 300,000–400,000 Russians who are Jewish only under the laws of Nuremberg, by virtue of which they're either married to a Jew or have a Jewish grandparent, after 10 or 15 years, they finally came up with a solution. And I will tell you what that solution is, but I apologize, I could only say it once, because it doesn't come out. It's just, it requires a unique level of concentration to be able to say, and I'm a little tired, so I'll be able to say it once. This is the law. This is the only people who have a civil marriage in Israel. This is the way it goes. If you are Jewish under the law of return, but not Jewish under the rabbinate or converted by a denomination outside of Israel, you are allowed to marry civilly another individual who is Jewish under the law of return, but is not Jewish according to the rabbinate or according to denominations outside of Israel. Now, if you thought it was hard to find somebody to love and to marry, those are the only two who can marry each other. If you fall under that category, the only one you're allowed to marry is somebody of that unique subsystem. If you are Jewish under the law of return, but not according to the rabbinate, who falls in love with a non-Jew, you're not allowed to have a civil marriage. If you're conservative reform or Orthodox not on the list, you're not allowed to have a civil marriage. It's only the Jews under the law of return who are not Jewish under the laws of the rabbinate, who have not converted, who are allowed to marry their subkind. Now imagine, this is not, call this, instead of J-date, imagine this is what it would be called. The Jews under the law of return who aren't Jewish under the laws of the rabbinate, who do not convert according to a denomination outside of Israel, date. It's catchy, I know, and I've patented it, so don't try to steal it from me. This is it. That's the group. This is your WhatsApp. You get to talk with each other, knock yourself out. All of you, there's a subgroup in your age group. That's it. Don't meet anybody. Don't date. Don't go dancing. Don't go to bars. This is who you get to meet, because that's the only people you can marry in the state of Israel, unless you go to Cyprus. All of this is a consequence of this process. The Kotel is a similar process. The fact, for example, kosher in Israel. The Supreme Court just legislated that kashrut in Israel, the term kosher, is owned by the millet. And there cannot be two koshers in Israel, only one. And an alternative kashrut stamp, you cannot say your restaurant is kosher. Kosher is a brand owned by the rabbinate. There can't be two competing kosher stamps. You can call yourself something else. You can't even say kosher style. You can come up with a name. You can call yourself Jewish food. You can't say you're kosher. The only ones who have the authority to say a food is kosher is if you are the ones who govern the millet. Judaism is a community, it's not a national structure. It's not part of a nation, it isn't the nation state. Similarly, Israelis can't even begin to think about the fact that anything to do with religion should be governed by multiple rabbinates. Because there is only one community of Jews. Truth is, there isn't. There is another community of Jews. There is a group of Jews in Israel who decided that they are their own millet. Do you know who they are? The ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox who populate the rabbinate are not consumers of the rabbinate. They do not use rabbinate services, neither for marriages, conversions, divorces, or kosher. And they're allowed anything that they say is good or kosher or acceptable is automatically accepted by the rabbinate. Other than that, nobody else has standing. So the challenge of Israel as a democracy, and with this I want to conclude and open up for any questions, is how do we find a Torah for a Jewish democracy which recognizes that Israel cannot be Jewish merely by the fact that it is the nation state of the Jews. Jews want more than that. Orthodox Jews want more than that. Masorati, Sephardi Jews want more than that. Increasingly, Ashkenazi Jews want more than that. When they speak about Israel as a Jewish state, it's not just the state of the Jews. And it's not just a place where 10 verses of Jewish culture and some socioeconomic vision define or exhaust the Jewishness. There's something more that Israel needs. Now we have a choice. We could either go to say, okay, you want more Judaism? No problem. Let's separate state from religion, or church from state, and go back to the European model. Judaism is what you do in your home. Judaism is what you do in your synagogues. Judaism is what you do privately. When you come into the public domain, you're in Austria. That's one possibility. Let's create a Jewishly neutral place which allows for freedom of religious expression for minorities and for Jews. And the public sphere is completely empty on this issue, or neutral on this issue. This was the vision of the Declaration of Independence. 70 years later, however, we now are wise. And we know that that's not what the Jews are going to accept. Israel is not going to be either the United States, Canada, or Austria in the Middle East where Jews are a majority. There is something more that a significant number of Jews want. In particular, the 50% who are either Orthodox or who the synagogue they go to is Orthodox. Those who, when they do Jewish, want to do Jewish orthodoxically. For them, it's not going to be sufficient. It's also not sufficient for a not insignificant number, possibly the majority of secular Israelis, who also are very comfortable with Jewishness in the public sphere. But very often they're willing for that Jewishness to be governed by whoever controls the Jewish millet. And so therefore the model of separation is one that they're just not going to accept. So 70 years later, you don't get to do a Seinfeld do-over. Let's go back. Let's go back to some utopia that never existed. That's where we really want to be. That's not going to work for Israeli citizens, and that's not where it seems that Israelis want their Jewishness to be expressed. Israel as homeland is a place that Jewishness has to be in a public sphere in ways that a secular liberal democracy doesn't allow us. We want more than just culture. We want Jewish life and a space and a preference for our Judaism in the public sphere. The only plausible solution, which was actually a solution offered by Chief Justice Barak in the mid-90s, is that Israel has to recognize, if you're doing sub-communities, it actually has to officially recognize multiple sub-communities. If you want to do the millet system, you have to have multiple rabbinates. You want to have a state-sponsored rabbinate? No problem. Then you have to have, just like you have to state-sponsor Christian, Muslim, you have to state-sponsor multiple Jewish communities. Once you do that, then, just as the Declaration worries that it will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and just as the Charter of Human Rights of the United Nations, which demands equality, irrespective of religion, race, or sex, if Israel wants to think of Judaism not in terms of a nation state, where the nation state is only Jews, Judaism is a sub-community, then it has to recognize that there cannot be one sub-community. You actually have to recognize that there are multiple sub-communities, each with their own sensitivities and sensibilities, each of which has to have their own rabbinate. Very interestingly, if some of you were careful and watched the news, by which I mean the Times of Israel, you will see that the Attorney General of the State of Israel recently made this exact declaration yesterday on the Kotel. While the deal that was offered and rejected in July is not going to be put on the table again, the Attorney General, in defending Israel's position on not fulfilling the deal that was signed, declares that it is committed to do the two following things. A, it is committed to building out an alternative section of the Kotel for liberal Jews, known as the Robinson Arch area, as mandated by Chief Justice Cheshin already in 2003, recognizing that the obligation and the rights of freedom of religion require that all Jews should be able to pray at a kotel in accordance with their ideology. What is a kotel depends, and now there's a kotel that we found, but he goes further than that. He says that this new kotel is the kotel of liberal Jews. There are now, he wants it, according to the state, there's going to be two official kotels. There is a kotel for the Orthodox millet, and there's a kotel for the liberal Jewish millet, for the first time. So while liberal Jews were arguing and said that according to the deal, we were supposed to create or put liberal Jews on the Kotel Managing Committee, Attorney General Mendelblit now says, the person who's going to be responsible for the liberal Jewish Kotel cannot be part of the rabbinate. Basically, for the first time recognizing that there has to be an official status for another sub-community. So as we move to the future, or as we think about the Israel we want, as at the one moment we celebrate Israel as it is now, and we look at Israel as a Jewish democracy in the middle of the Middle East, and we say, it's remarkable. Democracies don't tend to do too well in the Middle East. It's kind of hard to be a democracy in the Middle East. It's actually very, very difficult because you're in a constant existential battle. Democracies tend to be set aside in the midst of existential dangers. Israel hasn't set aside its democracy. And as we look 70 years, we say, you know what? It's remarkable the democratic institutions that we have. But we Jews say Dayenu, but we don't mean it. How do we know we don't mean it? Because if we really meant it, it would only have one stanza. We say, right? The song itself is a contradiction on itself. Because Dayenu means it would be enough. So say the one thing you want and say it would be enough. This would be enough, and if you only did this would be enough, and you only did this, it would be enough. So the truth is, it's not really enough, but we just like at each stage, we say Dayenu, but we hope for a next stage. Well, today, as we start this series of the Hartman Institute reflecting on different issues of Israel at 70, we could say Dayenu, but we'll say Dayenu as Jews. We'll say Dayenu, yes. Israel is a Jewish democracy, Dayenu. Something beautiful has been created. But the next Dayenu is the next line. And the next line is creating in Israel not a Jewishly neutral, secular state as envisioned by Herzl and the framers of the Declaration, but an Israel that will treat all Jews the way it treats all sub-communities. An Israel that teaches all Jews as it treats all sub-communities is an Israel that could truly be the homeland of the Jewish people in two ways. First, it could be the homeland because I get to do Jewish publicly as I want to do in my home. And I have the space to do so, not just in the Kotel, whether that public space is how I convert, whether that public space is how I eat, whether that public space is how I get married. But it's the homeland even a more deeper way, because it's the homeland of the Jewish people. And as the homeland of the Jewish people, it's also yours. It belongs to all of us. And as we who care about Israel, and the fact that you showed up tonight means that you actually care, because you had other things to do. Those of us who care, those of us who want Israel to be an integral part of Jewish life throughout the world, we recognize that for Israel to do so, it has to earn it. It has to earn our loyalty. It has to give me a place where it says, I respect you. This vision, the compromise on the Declaration of Independence, is not the undermining of Israel as a Jewish democracy. It actually lays the foundations for a different type of Jewish democracy. And all we need to do is that over the next number of years, the next 5, 10, or 15, when we're going to celebrate Israel's 80th or 85, God willing, inshallah, we'll be able to say that Israel is truly a more Jewish democracy, not by creating neutrality, but by creating the type of respect, the type of freedom of religion and freedom of conscience and dignity that every subgroup has. And just as Israel is democratic for Christians and Muslims, God willing, it will become democratic also for the Jews. Thank you. And now we have some time for any questions, please. Anyone? Yes, please, sir. No, the one behind you, and then I saw your hand. And then.
How do we get from here to there?
How do we get from here to there? The first thing we do is we first have to understand what's the here and what's the there. That's the job of education. Once you know what the there was, once you know that what's happening in Israel is the product of the fact that we didn't develop a system. It was all political compromises given to power that you needed for your coalition with a system that was not working, that once you recognize that the system is broken, and where it's broken, you have an alternative. 2, the Supreme Court already has set in place in numerous instances this system. The problem is that the Supreme Court in Israel is now under serious attack. It cannot replace the legislator. The legislator has to begin to implement this principle. And in order to do so, as I've said, this is something that the first moment I spoke in Toronto, I don't know when, and I say it every single time, but I don't just say it to you, I say it to groups of Israelis. This is my mantra as a Jewish educator. The way it starts is first you understand, and then you start spreading it, and then you create, then you influence the sovereign. And the sovereign is not in the Knesset, the sovereign is in the marketplace. The sovereign is the citizen. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for this, for the different subdivided tribes of Israel to recognize that everybody has a right to be protected, but no one has a right to be protected at the expense of the protection of the other. That's where the democratic system is failing now in Israel. And it's failing principally on a religious level for Jews. It's failing on an economic level for Israeli Arabs. But because there isn't complete equality. There is discrimination, but on a religiously, Christians and Muslims in Israel have far more religious freedom than Jews do. So once we understand it, once we talk about it, once we teach it, we get from here to there. Now, one of the ways that we both have to teach and we have to create public expressions for it. So for example, very soon, the government is going to be spending about $4 million, and it's going to build a better liberal kotel. Not like the little verschlepzig, whatever it is that they have there, this little deck, this ghetto-y deck going on there now, which it's nice because it's intimate. But it's not a nice space. Once there's a mechubadik space, and they're committed to creating a mechubadik space, we have to make sure that that space is filled with Jews. Filled with Jews. That has to be a space where music and song reverberates all over. So even though you go there not through the Kotel security gate, you have your own gate. And even though you don't have access to it through the plaza, whether it's at the Kotel, whether it's in schools, whether it's in communities all across the country, we have to infuse the consciousness that there are multiple millets. And when that'll happen, then the system way will lead to way. I wish there was a shortcut. I wish. I wish I was electable. So, someone says, oh, Donniel, you want to go into politics? You should go into politics. First of all, I say thank you very much. First of all, it's important for someone to know what they do. I'm a teacher. I'd be a terrible politician. But even if I had the ego to feel that I am actually a politician, I am sufficiently aware of the fact that I'm unelectable. So there is no politician that's going to save you. And Netanyahu, Herzog, Lapid, there's no difference. They will all have to build coalitions. It's until there are other voices saying, no, There's other things. Until they see these millets. The millet, by the way, can't be diaspora Jews. It's not you're not a citizen. Diaspora Jews have a right to move to Israel. They don't have an inalienable right to redefine the public space to say, I need us as a millet. They have other rights. That's for another lecture. But that process it's a slow process of education and empowering. And just like you saw Mendelblit, we're on the way. The Supreme Court rulings are in place. We just need to push it a little more, and it will take a few years. Is that do you feel I responded? Thank you, sir. Yes, please.
Basically, you've answered.
Answered the same one. Doug?
The brilliant move that, under your direction, the Institute is now taking, developing a more universal smicha program.
Yes.
It is wonderful, inclusion of Orthodox, conservative, Reform, women,
secular,
many other categories. What danger are you anticipating? What threat are you anticipating here? And to what extent have you started formulating, dealing with the enemies?
What Doug is referring to, we started at the Institute for Israel, a Beit Midrash LaRabbanut Yisraelit. And actually, a number of them are, some graduates of that program are going to be here in a couple of weeks. Graduates of that program. The idea, in many ways, the whole idea about that program is precisely what is to create rabbis who could lead communities. The changes are going to happen from the bottom up, and that community could be in a school. So there is now, for example, in Israel, there's a very vibrant modern orthodoxy in Israel. Very, very vibrant. I mean, really extreme modern. Like, half of the religious Zionists of Israel are modern Orthodox. Go to the gay parade in Jerusalem, half the people are wearing kippahs in support of gay rights. Half of the Jerusalem there is kippahs. It's very interesting. There's egalitarian Orthodox is becoming very, very strong. They need their rabbis. There are secular communities there are secular synagogues. They need their rabbis. Through the rabbinate, we are trying to create an alternative rabbinate. We're trying to create on the ground communities, because when you have communities, you're pushing the millet system. You're using it. You're using that thought process. I'm here. And I'm not just an individual by myself who's ignored. I'm a people. Now, my smicha, my father's smicha, their smicha, they are as illegitimate as I am. So when I give smicha as an illegitimate rabbi, I bestow illegitimacy on people. And I'm happy to have them join my club, because then I don't feel as lonely. But the idea behind it is, you are a rabbi in our tradition, not by government approval. That's when you are a Jewish or Christian minority, you're looking for the Ottoman Empire to grant you legitimacy, not as a rabbi, but you're standing in the state. The state of Israel could only determine who has legal status in the state. It doesn't determine who is a rabbi. Do you know who determines who's a rabbi? The people who come to your shul. The people who come to your classes. And if we will train 100, 200, 300 major figures who are charismatic, who present a Judaism that's exciting, the state of Israel, the sovereign, the real sovereign, will declare their legitimacy. And eventually, it's only eventually that it will have also national significance. But there are dangers. the group that has a monopoly over the millet, and it's interesting, it's not the religious Zionists. Naftali Bennett has no interest in religious legislation, none whatsoever. He says, I don't care about religious legislation. My position on these issues, he said, is that he actually is advocating for he voted for the Kotel deal. The leader of the religious Zionist community voted for it. He was very comfortable with it. He's actually, as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, is advocating for it. It's the other half of the religious Zionist community, and it is the ultra-Orthodox who have a monopoly and who want to continue that monopoly, and they have what to lose. Now, we're going to see. There's going to be a battle very shortly. This alternative kashrut was just taken over by the Tzohar rabbis, which is a large group of modern Orthodox rabbis. Now legally, they're not allowed to say they're giving a kashrut. You're not allowed to say it's kosher. You have to say something else. You know, I joke, maybe they'll call it, instead of kosher, they'll call it roshek, kosher, rishak or something. They'll call it, it's a rishak, and they'll have a mirror, which will flip, it's reshak. I just said reshak, but behind it, it'll flip it over, and that's what, I didn't say kosher, just the mirror. I'm calling it reshak, I think it's reshak, something like that. They'll do something like that. I don't know how, listen, we Jews are ingenious. As soon we're going to have Pesach. Please remember, we are a people who came up with the idea that you could sell chametz. Not a lot of I don't have chametz. Do you have chametz? I don't have chametz. It's not my chametz. It's not my I don't know whose chametz it is. It might be in my house, and it's going to be my chametz, and it was my chametz, but right now it's not my chametz, and in this way I am fulfilling the biblical requirement of not having chametz, because anybody who has chametz, they're cut off from the people. I don't want to be cut off from the people. I don't have chametz. So we Jews we have an infinite ability to do these things, and so we'll see how it gets done. There is going to be some political battles. There are attacks. There are attacks, there are attempts to control, and we'll see. Hopefully we'll be nimble enough, and hopefully we'll get to a critical number quick enough that the realities will speak for themselves. Was that? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a non-religious Jew, born and bred in Israel. Served in the army. I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you.
You knew your father, and respected him. And you have a utopian view that I hope comes to pass. I don't get my information from what did you call it?
Times of what?
The Times of Israel. I read Haaretz and Yediot Achronot, listen to Kol Israel. I don't see Israel as a democracy any longer. I think that what happens in Israel is undemocratic. There are things that, as a Jew, I cannot live with. That we turn immigrants away to places where they're going to be fugitives, where they're going to be killed and tortured. We do all kinds of horrible things. Bennett has now instituted new books, study groups in the Filoni schools. When I read the content of it, I'm quite convinced that democracy is gone.
Okay. I hear you. It's not that I don't hear you, it's that I refuse to give up. But it's not that I don't hear you. And Yossi, where are you? I said a line this morning that moved me very deeply, but I keep on forgetting it. Could you remind me of my line? Because I'm telling you, it came out by accident, and I was so inspired by it, so I just don't remember. No, it just came out. It came out in the midst of jet lag, but Yossi was smart enough. My dear friend, he actually said, whoa, this is a line we have to type. So he wrote it. What is it?
I sent this to you, and it's called the money quote.
Okay.
I love Israel for what it is, but more importantly, it's where I dream of the Israel that can be.
For me, that's right. As I'm celebrating, thank you very much. This is what at 70, I refuse to stop dreaming about the Israel that can be. Just not going to stop. Israel is where I dream about. Israel is not where I celebrate who we are. Israel is where I dream about who we can be. Now, how to keep that up and not give up? That's our challenge, my friend. And it's not that I don't hear you. I hear you. And you might want to stop reading Haaretz. No, let me just be very clear. It's not that I'm claiming that Haaretz is not correct. Okay, you understood what I meant? It's just because it's just a break. It's like there's only so much reality that a human being could handle. There's something about it's nice. So see, utopias are actually really interesting. You know what, I don't know if this is a good place to end, and I see you standing as a good reminder. There's something very mixed about utopias. On the one hand, utopia means nowhere. And when you have utopian dreams, you could actually become irrelevant. And you dream about a nowhere and about something that could never be. But one of the powers of utopia is that it becomes the residue for your aspirations, which could not be rooted in reality. And where reality doesn't allow your dreams a foundation, they'll dissipate. And so one of the goals of utopia is to allow your dreams to flourish. Now, when they flourish, they're alive. And when they're alive, it's possible that there will be a day that they will move from the utopia to the reality. Without a utopia, we could become depressed. Without a utopia, we give up. So we have to, there's a dance. We could become so starry-eyed that we actually think reality is a utopia. And then we don't see the real problems and the pain that you represented. You didn't just mention, I felt your pain, because your love for Israel is infinite. Infinite. It's like you just opened your mouth, and the way you spoke, you were speaking as a full Zionist and lover of Israel. With all the pain, when you said it, you weren't saying it as a bystander. You were saying it as a victim. And you hear it in your voice. And kol hakavod to you. But, so it's very dangerous if you actually think what is what ought to be. It's also very dangerous when if you're only satisfied by some dramatic utopian vision which will never be. We have to use utopias, not in order to escape reality, but to never give up a commitment to change it. As always, it was a pleasure being with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Donniel, for launching an incredible series. Thank you to Rabbi Yossi Saperman and to Beth Torah for hosting us. But I want to put a coda on what Donniel just said, and part of it is from the question that you asked. Part of the hope is part of the vision that Donniel and Yehuda Kurtzer here in North America and the Hartman team are creating in reality. And so come back on Monday, March 19th, but not here at Bet Tzedek, and come back on Tuesday, May 8th, and meet 6 of the incredible rabbinic figures who have come out of the program. Because if you want to hear and live and experience why Donniel has the hope that he has, come meet. Some of these people have been my teachers. Some of them I haven't met myself yet. But this is the future that if we support it and build it, will bring to reality what Donniel's talking. So Monday, March 19th at Bet Tzedek, Tuesday, May 8th, right back here at Beth Torah, and we hope we'll see you on both of those occasions for wonderful evenings. Be well.